Sometimes you get a little bit tired of playing chord progressions that all sound like this. And you want to hear some other less predictable chords, and actually there are a lot of options for that which are already built into the key and let you play something like this. What I'm using here is borrowing some chords from a category called minor subdominant chords, which is a large group of chords that can really sound incredible in a chord progression. When I was starting out trying to learn jazz standards, then I didn't know how to analyze them. So in the isolated Danish mountains, while I was practicing endlessly, I was just trying to remember the chords, not understand what was going on. My knowledge of harmony was limited to realizing what key something was in and maybe figuring out that something was a 2-5-1 of some sort. But I still often ran into other progressions that sounded great, but where I didn't really understand why. And a lot of the chords that I liked the most turned out to be minor subdominant chords. They were often the part of the song that I was really drawn to, but that I couldn't figure out. The music that I'm going to explore in this video is in a key. It's not random chords next to each other, which is important to realize. If you take the key of C major, then the foundation is based on the C major scale and the basic diatonic chords that you can create in the key if you stack thirds, which would give you these seventh chords. The way I look at these chords, they're split into three groups: tonic chords, dominant chords, and subdominant chords. The tonic chords would be C major 7, E minor 7, and A minor 7. The dominant chords are G7 and B half diminished. And the subdominant chords would be F major 7, D minor 7, and sometimes A minor 7. The groups are made so that the chords in the group can often replace one another in a chord progression, contain many of the same notes, and therefore also sound similar. Usually you call this the function of the chord. So in C major, E minor 7 has a tonic function and G7 has a dominant function. Notice that the function of a chord is also about the chord progression, so it's not just about the notes in the chord. That's also why you can find examples of A minor 7 being a subdominant chord in C major, as well as other places where it's a tonic function. When a song is in a major key, then the great thing about that is that you have all the diatonic chords that I just showed you, but you can also use the chords from the minor key with the same root. So in C major, you can also use the chords from C minor. So for some reason, I can just never remember what is relative and what is parallel minor. So that's why I'm saying it like this. Sorry about that. This is not actually coming from scales and is essentially more about voice leading, but starting with a scale is a great way to get some things to work with, and then we can expand on it and get to some of the great sounds later in the video. For C natural minor, you have these chords. And in fact, most of these will work as minor subdominant chords. D half diminished, F minor 7, A flat major 7, and B flat 7 will all function beautifully as minor subdominants. So let's check those out and hear how they work in a song. The D half diminished chord is the easiest to put to use in a 2-5-1, so that you in fact have an entire dark sounding minor cadence, and then it beautifully resolves to a bright major sound, similar to Cole Porter's I Love You. The F minor 7 chord is more often used as a way of getting from a subdominant chord to a tonic chord, so not as a part of a 2-5-1. Often you will in fact see it as an F minor 6 or F minor major 7 chord, but I'll get to that in a bit. Here it is moving from a D minor 7 back to C major 7. The flat 6 major 7 is probably my favorite, together with one that I'll cover later, and it is a beautiful sound that can be used in quite a few different ways. It can be used as a transitional chord similar to the F minor 7, that will give you this. But it also sounds great if you use it in a cadence instead of a 2 chord, which is how it's used in Cole Porter's Night and Day. One of the minor subdominant chords that is a little bit less obvious, and probably also the cause of many internet discussions, is the flat 7, also called the backdoor dominant.
It's surprisingly simple to get total strangers completely furious with you.
They should get a life.
You often hear that used as a transition from a subdominant back to the tonic. But it also sometimes appears as an extra movement at the end of a section. Now you have some basic examples, so I can show you some of the more advanced sounds before getting to the one that doesn't actually fit in the system. But first, let's just go over one of the questions that I get the most often when I'm analyzing something involving these chords, which is something like, why is A flat major 7 a minor subdominant? It's not even a minor chord. What you want to know here is that it's called minor not because it's a minor chord, but because it's coming from the minor key. The reason that it's subdominant is that it doesn't contain a B, so the leading note in the key, and it will resolve to a tonic chord. This means that it isn't a dominant and it also isn't tonic, and therefore it's a subdominant. What I'm talking about in this video is also sometimes referred to as modal interchange, but that concept is, as far as I know, a lot wider. This is much more specific to the key and more a description of the type of harmony that you come across in jazz standards. The next thing to look at is how the chords often are given extensions so that they work better with the major key, which gives you some really beautiful chords. And then that chord that doesn't really fit in the system but still sounds beautiful. Some of the other very common minor subdominant chords are a little bit different in terms of how they're colored, and those are in fact the ones that you see most of the time. As I mentioned earlier, then the minor subdominants are more a result of voice leading than of chords from a scale. And in fact, it's mostly about one note that is moving. So in C major, that would be the A moving down to A flat to G, which, if you start with an F chord, gives you this. The sixth note in the scale is one of the most important parts of the subdominant sound, and when you alter that, you create minor subdominants. The most common minor subdominant, and maybe the one that it sort of all points back to in jazz, is probably the 4 minor 6 chord. So in C major, that would be this. The F minor 6 is a great sound in C major because it's a little bit closer to the key than the F minor 7 that also has an E flat, which is not in the C major scale. The F minor 6 also allows for having an E in the melody, so that there's a little bit more melodic freedom over it when it appears in a C major context. The most common scale to use for this chord is F melodic minor. You can also see, or rather hear, how F minor 6 and B flat 7 are interchangeable. And that also explains why the backdoor dominant is a Lydian dominant, so it has a sharp 11 as an extension. There is one more subdominant chord to cover, also one that is fairly common, but let's first look at going a little bit beyond the subdominant function. This video is of course about minor subdominants, but you want to be aware that you come across dominants that are borrowed from minor all the time as well. The minor scale where the dominant function lives is harmonic minor, which is probably also why it's called that. And in here you have two chords with a dominant function. G7, which becomes a G7 flat 9, flat 13, and B diminished. And both of those are useful like a basic 2-5-1 with a G7 flat 9. And this is an elegant way of adding a dominant to get a different transition from a backdoor dominant to the tonic. The chord that doesn't really seem to fit and which is often misunderstood as some sort of tritone substitute is the Neapolitan subdominant. The way to understand it is really to think of it as a 4 minor triad. So in C major that is an F minor triad with an added 6, but in this case it's a flat 6, since this is a stronger leading note to take us down to the root C. And in jazz we turn that into a D flat major 7 chord and have progressions like this. In this case, the chord isn't found in C minor, but as you can see, it's just the result of voice leading. Keep in mind that chords is anyway just a very crude way to understand voice leading, something I've talked about before. Making things into vertical chord symbols doesn't always help you understand what's going on. Tonal harmony is powerful and fun to mess around with, and there is a lot to unpack in there. It's a lot more than just a bunch of 2-5-1s or trying to make everything into some sort of 5-1 progression. And that is what is beautiful about it. It's actually also something that will help you learn songs a lot easier and play better solos. And if you want to get better at learning songs and use tonal harmony to play better solos, then check out this video, which covers that and also talks a bit about some shortcuts from Barry Harris and Pat Martino.